Organism and population. Our living world is fascinatingly diverse and amazingly complex. We can try to understand its complexity by investigating processes at various levels of biological organization, macromolecules, cell, tissue, organ, individual organism, population, communities, ecosystem, and biomes. At any level of biological organism, we can ask two types of questions. For example, when we hear the bulbul singing early morning in the garden, we may ask how does the bird sing or why does the bird sing. The how type question seeks the mechanism behind the processes while the why type questions seeks the significance of the process. For the first question in our example, the answer might be in terms of operation of the voice box and the vibrating bones in the bird, whereas the second question is the answer may lie in the bird's need to communicate with its mate during breeding season. When you observe nature around you with a scientific frame of mind, you will certainly come up with many interesting questions of both types. Why are night blooming flowers generally white? How does the bee know which flower has nectar? Why does cactus have so many thorns? How does the chick sparrow recognize her own mother? And so on. You have already learned in previous classes that ecology is a subject study which studies the interaction among organisms and between the organism and its physical abiotic environment. Ecology is basically concerned with four levels of biological organism, population, communities, and biomes. In this chapter, we explore ecology at organismic and population level. Organism and its environment. Ecology at the organismic level is essentially physiological ecology, which tries to understand how different organisms are adapted to their environment in terms of not only survival but also reproduction. You may have learned in earlier classes how the rotation of our planet around the sun and tilt of its axis cause annual variation in the intensity and duration of temperature, resulting in distinct seasons. This variation, together with annual variation in precipitation, remember precipitation includes both rain and snow, account for formation of major biomes such as desert, rainforest, and tundra. Regional and local variation within each biomes lead to formation of a wide variety of habitat. Major biomes of India are shown in figure on planet Earth. Life exists on not just in a few favorable habitats, but even in extreme and harsh habitat. Scorching Rajasthan desert, rain-soaked Meghalaya forest, deep ocean trench, torrential stream, permafrost, snow-laden polar region, high mountain tops, thermal spring, and stinking compost pits, to name a few. Even our intestine is a unique habitat for hundreds of species of microbes. What are the key elements that lead to so much variation in the physical and chemical condition of different habitats? The most important one are temperature, water, light, and soil. We must remember that the physiochemical abiotic component alone do not characterize the habitat of an organism completely. The habitat includes biotic component also. Pathogen, parasite, predators, and competitors of the organism with which they interact constantly. We assume that over a period of time, the organism had, through natural selection, evolved adaptation to optimize its survival and reproduction in its habitat. Each organism has an invariably defined range of conditions that it can tolerate. Diversity in the resource it utilizes and a distinct functional role in the ecological system. All these together comprises its niche. Major abiotic factors. Temperature. Temperature is the most important ecologically relevant environmental factor. You are aware that the average temperature on land varies seasonally, decreases progressively from equator towards the pole and from plains to the mountain tops. It ranges from sub-zero level in polar areas and high altitude to greater than 50 degree centigrade in the tropical desert. In summer, there are, however, unique habitats such as thermal spring and deep sea hydrothermal vent where average temperature exceeds 100 degrees centigrade. It is general knowledge that mango trees do not and cannot grow in temperate countries like Canada and Germany. Snow leopards are not found in Kerala forest and tuna fish are rarely caught beyond tropical latitudes in the ocean. You can appreciate the significance of temperature to living organism when you realize that it affects the kinetic of enzyme and through its metabolic activity and other physiological functions of the organism. A few organisms can tolerate and thrive in a wide range of temperature. They are called eurothermal, but a vast majority of them are restricted to a narrow range of temperature. Such organisms are called stenothermal. The level of thermal tolerance of different species determine to a large extent their geographical distribution. Can you think of a few eurothermal and stenothermal animals and plants? In recent years, there has been a growing concern about the gradually increasing average global temperature. If these trends continue, would you expect the distribution range of some species to be affected? Water. Water is another the most important factor influencing the life of organisms. In fact, life on Earth originated in water and is unsustainable without water. Its availability is so limited in desert that only special adaptation make it possible for organisms to live there. The productivity and distribution of plant is also heavily dependent on water. You might think that organisms living in ocean, lakes and rivers should not face any water related problem, but it is not true. For aquatic organisms, the quality, chemical composition, pH of water become important. The salt concentration measured as the salinity in parts per thousand is less than 5 in inland water, 30 to 35 in sea and greater than 100 in some hypersaline lagoons. Some organisms are tolerant of a wide range of salinities, urothalline, but others are restricted to a narrow range, stenohaline. Many freshwater animals cannot live for long in sea water and vice versa because of their osmotic problem they would face. Light. Since plants produce food through photosynthesis, a process which is only possible when sunlight is available as a source of energy, we can quickly understand the importance of light for living organisms, particularly autotrophs. Many species of small plant, herbs and shrubs growing in forest are adapted to photosynthesis optimally under very low light conditions because they are constantly overshadowed by tall canopies trees. Many plants are also dependent on sunlight to meet their photoperiodic requirement for flowering. For many animals too, light is important in that They use the diurnal and seasonal variation in light intensity and duration photoperiod as cues for timing their foraging, reproductive and migratory activities. The availability of light on lands is closely linked with that of temperature since the sun is the source of both, but deep greater than 500 in the ocean, 500 meter in the ocean. The environment is dark and its inhabitants are not aware of the existence of celestial source of energy called sun. What then is their source of energy? The spectral quality of solar radiation is also important for life. The UV component of the spectrum is harmful to many organisms, while not all the color component of the visible spectrum are available for the marine plant living in different depths of the ocean. Among the red, green and brown algae that inhabit in sea, which is likely to be found in the deepest water, and why. Soil. The nature and properties of soil in different places vary. It is dependent on the climate, the weathering process, whether soil is transported or sedimentary, and how soil development occurs. Various characteristics of the soil such as soil composition, grain size, and aggregation determine the percolation and water holding capacity of the soil. These characteristics, along with parameters such as pH, mineral composition, and topography, determines to a large extent the vegetation in any area. This in turn dictates the type of animal that can be supported. Similarly, in the aquatic environment, the sediment characteristics often determine the type of benthic animal that can thrive there. Response of abiotic factor. Having realized that the abiotic condition of many habitats may vary drastically in time, we now ask how do the organisms living in such habitat cope or manage with the stressful condition. But before attempting to answer this question, we should perhaps ask first why a highly variable external environment should bother organism after all. One would expect that during the course of millions of years of their existence, many species would have evolved a relatively constant internal within the body environment that permits all biochemical reaction and physiological function to proceed with maximal efficiency and thus enhance the overall fitness of the species. This constancy, for example, could be in terms of optimal temperature and osmotic concentration of the body fluid. Ideally, then the organism should try to maintain the constancy of its internal environment, a process called homeostasis. Despite varying external environment conditions that tend to upset its homeostasis, let us take an analogy to clarify this important concept. Suppose a person is able to perform his or her best when the temperature is 25 degrees centigrade and wishes to maintain it so, even when it is scorching hot or freezingly cold outside. It could be achieved at home, in the car while traveling, and at workplace by using an air conditioner in summer and heater in winter. Then his or her performance would be always maximal regardless of the weather around him or her. Where the person's homeostasis is accomplished not through physiological but artificial means, how do other living organisms cope with the situation? Let us look at the various possibilities. 1. Regulate. Some organisms are able to maintain homeostasis by physiological, sometimes behavioral also means, which ensure constant body temperature, constant osmotic concentration, etc. All birds and mammals and a very few lower vertebrates and invertebrate species are indeed capable of such regulation, thermoregulation and osmoregulation. Evolutionary biologists believe that the success of mammals is largely due to their ability to maintain a constant body temperature and thrive whether they live in Antarctica or in the Sahara Desert. The mechanism used by most mammals to regulate their body temperature are similar to the one that we humans use. We maintain a constant body temperature of 37 degrees in summer when outside temperature is more than our body temperature. We sweat profusely, the resulting evaporating cooling. Similar to what happens with a desert cooler in operation, bring down the body temperature. In winter, when temperature is much lower than 37 degrees centigrade, we start to shiver, a kind of exercise which produces heat and raise the body temperature. Plants, on the other hand, do not have such mechanism to maintain internal temperature. To confirm, an overwhelming majority, 99% of animals and nearly all plants cannot maintain a constant internal environment. Their body temperature changes with the ambient temperature. In aquatic animals, the osmotic concentration of the body fluids change with that of the ambient air. Water osmotic concentration. These animals and plants are simply conformers. Considering the benefits of a constant internal environment to the organism, we must ask why these conformers have not evolved to become regulator. Recall the human analogy we used above. Much as they like, how many people can really afford an air conditioner? Many simply sweat it out and resign themselves to suboptimal performance in the hot summer month. Thermoregulation is energetically expensive for many organisms. This is particularly true for small animals like seaweed and hummingbirds. Heat loss or heat gain is a function of surface area. Since small animals have a large surface area related to their volume, they tend to lose their body heat very fast when it is cold outside. Then they have to expend much energy to generate body heat through metabolism. This is the main reason why very small animals are rarely found in polar regions. During the course of evolution, the cost and benefit of maintaining a constant internal environment are taken into consideration. Some species have evolved the ability to regulate, but only over a limited range of environmental conditions beyond which they simply conform. If the stressful external conditions are localized or remain only for a short duration, the organism has two other alternatives for survival. 3. Migrate. The organism can move away temporarily from the stressful habitat to a more hospitable area and return when stressful period is over. In human analogy, this strategy is likely a person moving from Delhi to Simla for duration of summer. Many animals, particularly birds, during winter undertake long-distance migration to more hospitable area. Every winter, the famous Keolado National Park, Bharatpur in Rajasthan hosts thousands of migratory birds coming from Siberia and other extremely cold northern regions. For suspend, in bacteria, fungi and lower plant, various kinds of thick wall spores are formed which help them to survive unfavorable conditions. These germinate on availability of suitable environment. In higher plants, seeds and some other vegetative reproductive structures serve as means to tide over period of stress beside helping in dispersal. They germinate to form new plant under favorable moisture and temperature conditions. They do so by reducing their metabolic activity and growing into a state of dormancy. In animal, the organism is unable to migrate might avoid the stress by escaping in time. The familiar case of bear going into hibernation during winter is an example of escape in time. Some snails and fish go into estivation to avoid summer-related problems, heat and desiccation. Under unfavorable conditions, many zooplankton species in lakes and ponds are known to enter diapause, a stage of suspended development. Adaptation. While considering the various alternatives available to organisms for coping with extreme their environment, we have seen that some are able to respond through certain physiological adjustment while others do so behaviorally, migrating temporarily to a less stressful habitat. These responses are also actually their adaptation. So we can say that adaptation is any attribute of organism, morphological, physiological, behavioral, that enables the organism to survive and reproduce in its habitat. Many adaptations have evolved over a long evolutionary time and are genetically fixed. In the absence of an external source of water, the kangaroo rat in North America desert is capable of meeting all its water requirements through its internal fat oxidation, in which water is a byproduct. It also has the ability to concentrate its urine so that minimal volume of water is used to remove excretory product. Many desert plants have a thick cuticle on their leaf surface and have their stomata arranged in deep pits, sunken, to minimize water loss through transpiration. They also have a special photosynthetic pathway CAM that enables their stomata to remain closed during daytime. Some desert plants like Opuntia have no leaf, they are reduced to spine and the photosynthetic function is taken over by the flattened stem. Mammals from colder climates generally have shorter ear and limbs to minimize heat loss. This is called Allen's rule. In the polar sea, aquatic mammals like seal have a thick layer of fat bulbar below their skin that act as an insulator and reduce loss of body heat. Some organisms process adaptation that are physiological, which allow them to respond quickly to a stressful situation. If you had ever been to any high altitude place greater than 3500 meters, Rotang Pass near Manali and Leh, you must have experienced what is called altitude sickness. Its symptoms include nausea, fatigue and heart palpitation. This is because in the low atmospheric pressure of high altitude, the body does not get enough oxygen, but gradually you get acclimatized and stop experiencing altitude sickness. How did your body solve this problem? The body compensates low oxygen availability by increasing red blood cell production, decreasing the binding affinity of hemoglobin, and by increasing breathing rate. Many tribes live in the high altitude of Himalayan find out if they normally have a higher red blood cell count or total hemoglobin than people living in the plain. In most animals, the metabolic reaction and hence all the physiological functions proceed optimally in a narrow temperature range. In human, it is 37 degrees centigrade. But there are microbes, archaeobacteria, that flourish in hot spring and deep sea hydrothermal vent where temperature far exceed 100 degrees centigrade. How is this possible? Many fish thrive in Antarctic water where the temperature is always below zero. How do they manage to prevent their body fluid from freezing? A large variety of marine invertebrates and fish live at great depth in the ocean where the pressure could be greater than 100 times the normal atmospheric pressure that we experience. How do they live under such high pressure, and do they have any special enzyme? Organisms living in such extreme environments show a fascinating array of biochemical adaptation. Some organisms show behavioral responses to cope up with variation in their environment. Desert lizards lack the physiological ability that mammals have to deal with the high temperature of their habitat, but manage to keep their body temperature fairly constant by behavioral means. They bask in the sun and absorb heat when their body temperature drops below the comfort zone, but move into shade when the ambient temperature starts increasing. Some species are capable of boring into the soil to hide and escape from the above ground heat. Population. Population attributes. In nature, we rarely find isolated single individual of many species. Majority of them live in groups in a well-defined geographical area, share or compete for similar resources, potentially interbreed and thus constitute a population. Although the term interbreeding implies sexual reproduction, a group of individuals resulting from even asexual reproduction is also generally considered a population for the purpose of ecological studies. All the cormorants in a wetland, rats in an abundant dwelling, teak wood trees in a forest tract, bacteria in a culture plate, and lotus plant in a pond are examples of a population. In earlier chapter, you have learned that although an individual organism is one that has to cope with a change in environment, it is at the population level that natural selection operates to evolve the desired trait. Population ecology is therefore an important area because it links ecology to population genetics and evaluation. A population has certain attributes whereas an individual organism does not. An individual may have birth and death, but a population has birth rate and death rate. In a population, these rates refer to per capita birth and death. The rate hence expressed are changed in number, increasing or increase or decrease with the respect to the member of the population. Here is an example: if a pond where there were 20 lotus plants last year, and though through reproduction 8 new plants are added, taking the current population to 28, we calculate the birth rate as 8 by 20 equal 0.4 offspring per lotus per year. If 4 individuals in a laboratory population of 40 fruit flies dies during a specified time interval, say a week, the death rate in the population during that period is 4 by 40 equal 0.1 individual per fruit fly per week. Another attribute characteristic of a population is sex ratio. An individual is either a male or a female, but a population has a sex ratio. For example, 60% of the population are female and 40% male. A population at any given time is composed of individuals of different ages. If the age distribution percent individual of a given age group is plotted for the population, the resulting structure is called an age pyramid. For human population, the age period generally show age distribution of male and female in a diagram. The shape of the pyramid reflects the growth status of the population, A, whether it is growing, B, stable, or C, declining. The size of the population tells us a lot about its status in the habitat. Whatever ecological processes we wish to investigate in a population, be it outcome of competition with another species, the impact of a predators or the effect of a pesticide application, we always evaluate them in terms of any change in the population size. The size in nature could be as low as less than 10 Siberian cranes at Bharatpur wetland in any year, or go into millions chlamydomonas in a pond. Population size, technically called population density, designated as N, capital N, need not necessarily to be measured in number only, although total number is generally the most appropriate measure of population density. It is in the same cases either meaningless or difficult to determine. In an area, if there are 200 carrot grasses, Parthenium Phytophoresis plant, but only a single huge banyan tree with a large canopy, stating that the population density of a banana is low relative to that of carrot grass, amount to the underestimating the enormous role of the banyan tree in the community. In such cases, the percent cover or biomass is a more meaningful measure of the population size. Total number is again not an easily adaptable measure if the population is huge and counting is impossible or very time consuming. If you have a dense laboratory culture or bacteria in a petri dish, what is the best measure to report its density? Sometimes for certain ecological investigation, there is no need to know the absolute population densities. Relative density serve the purpose equally well. For instance, the number of fishes caught per trap is good enough measure of its total population density in the lake. We are mostly obliged to estimate the population size indirectly without actually counting them or seeing them. The tiger sanctuary is our national park, and tiger reserves is often based on the park mark and facial pellets. Population growth. The size of the population of any species is not a statistics parameter. It keeps changing with time depending on various factors including food availability, vegetation, pressure, and adverse weather. In fact, it is this change in population density that gives us some idea of what is happening to the population, whether it is flourishing or declining. Whatever might be ultimate reason, the density of a population in a given habitat during a given period fluctuates due to change in four basic processes, two of which, natality and immigration, contribute to an increase in the population density, and two, mortality and immigration, to a decrease. 1. Natality refer to the number of births during a given period in the population that are added to the initial density. 2. Mortality is the number of deaths in the population during given period. 3. Immigration is the number of individuals of the same species that have come into the habitat from elsewhere during the time period under consideration. For immigration is the number of individuals of the population who left the habitat and gone elsewhere during the time period under consideration. So if n is the population density at time t, then its density at time t plus 1 is capital N t plus 1 is equal to capital N t plus b plus I minus d plus e. You can see from the above equation the population density will increase in the number of the birth plus number of the immigration D plus I is more than the number of death plus the number of immigration D plus E. Under normal condition, birth and death are the most important factor influencing population density. The other two factors assuming importance only under special conditions. For instance, if a new habitat is just being colonized, immigration always contributes more significantly to the population growth than birth rate. Growth model. Does the growth of a population with time show any specific and predictable pattern? We have been concerned about unbridled human growth, human population growth, and problem created by in our country, and it is therefore natural for us to be curious in different animal population in nature behave the same way or show some restraint on the growth. Perhaps we can learn a lesson or two from nature on how to control population growth. 1. Exponential growth. Resource, food and space availability is obviously essential for unimpeded growth of a population. Ideally, when resources in habitats are unlimited, each species has the ability to realize fully its innate potential to grow in number, as Darwin observed while developing his theory of natural selection. Then the population growth is an exponential or geometric fashion. If in a population of size n, the birth rate, not total number but per capita birth, are represented as B, and death rate, again per capita death rate, as D, then the increase or decrease in n during a unit time period t dn by dt will be d capital N by dt equal b minus d into capital N. Let b minus d equal r, then dn dt equal r capital N. The small r in this equation is called the intrinsic rate of natural increase and is a very important parameter chosen for assessing impact of any biotic or abiotic factor on population growth. To give you some idea about the magnitude of R values, for the Norway rat, the R is 0.015, and for the floor beetle it is 0.12. In 1981, the R value for human population in India was 0.0205. Find out what the current R value is. For calculating it, you need to know the birth rate and death rate. The above equation describes the exponential or geometric growth pattern of a population and result in a J-shaped curve when we plot capital N in relation to time. If you are familiar with basic calculus, you can derive the integral form of the exponential growth equation as np equal to n0 e to the rt, where np equal population density after time t, n0 equal population density at time 0, r intrinsic rate of natural increase, e the base of natural logarithm 2.71828. Any species growing exponentially under unlimited resource condition can reach enormous population density in a short time. Darwin shows how even a slow growing animal like elephant could reach enormous number in absence of check. The following is an anecdote popularly narrated to demonstrate dramatically now how fast a huge population could build up when growing exponentially. The king and the minister sat for a chess game. The king, confident of winning the game, was ready to accept any bet proposed by the minister. The minister humbly said that if he won, he wanted only some wheat grain, the quantity of which is to be calculated by placing on the chessboard 1 grain in square, then 2 in square, then 4 in square, then 8 in square 4, then in square 1, then 2 in square 2, then 4 in square 3, and 8 in square 4, and so on, doubling each time the previous quantity of wheat on the next square until all the 64 square were filled. The king accepted the seemingly silly bet and started the game, but unluckily for him, the minister won. The king felt that fulfilling the minister bet was so easy. He started with a single gain on first square and proceeded to fill the other square following minister's suggested procedure, but by the time he covered his half of the cheeseboard, the king realized to his dismay that all the wheat produced in his entire kingdom pulled together would still be inadequate to cover all the 64 square. Now think of a tiny paramecium starting with just one individual and through binary fusion doubling in number every day. Imagine what a mind-boggling population size it would reach in 64 days, provided food and space remain unlimited. To logistic growth. No population of any species in nature has at its disposal unlimited resources to permit exponential growth. This leads to competition between individuals for limited resources. Eventually, the fittest individual will survive and reproduce. The government of many countries have also realized this fact and introduced various restraints with a view to limit human population growth. In nature, a given habitat has enough resources to support a maximum possible number beyond which no further growth is possible. Let us call this limit as nature carrying capacity K for the special species in that habitat. A population growing in a habitat with limited resources shows initially a lag phase, followed by phase of acceleration and deceleration, and finally an asymptote. When the population density reaches the carrying capacity, a plot of n in relation to time small t results in a sigmoid curve. This type of population growth is called Verhulst-Perl logistic growth and is described by the following equation: dndt equal r capital N of k minus capital N divided by k, where capital N equal population density at time t, r equal intrinsic rate of natural increase, k equal carrying capacity. Since resources for growth for most animal population are finite and become limited sooner or later, the logistic growth model is considered a more realistic one. Gathered from government census data the population figure for India for the last 100 years, plot them and check which growth pattern is evident. Life history variation. Population evolved to maximize their reproductive fitness, also called Darwinian fitness, high R value, in a habitat in which they live under a particular set of selection pressures. Organisms evolve towards the most efficient reproductive strategy. Some organisms breed only once in their lifetime, specific salmon fish, bamboo, while others breed many times during their lifetime, most birds and mammals. Some produce a large number of small-sized offspring, oyster, pelagic fish, while others produce a small number of large-sized offspring, bird, mammals. So, which is desirable for maximizing fitness? Ecologists suggest that life history traits of organisms have evolved in relation to the constraint imposed by the abiotic and biotic component of the habitat in which they live.
Evolution of life history traits in different species is currently an important area of research being conducted by ecologists. Population interaction. Can you think of any natural habitat on Earth that is inhabited just by a single species? There is no such habitat and such a situation is even inconceivable. For any species, the minimal requirement is one more species on which it can feed. Even a plant species which makes its own food cannot survive alone. It needs soil microbes to break down the organic matter in soil and return the inorganic nutrient for absorption. And then, how will the plant manage pollination without an animal agent? It is obvious that in nature, animal plants and microbes do not and cannot live in isolation but interact in various ways to form a biological community. Even in minimal community, many interactive linkages exist, although all may not be readily apparent. Interspecific interaction arises from the interaction of population of two different species. They could be beneficial, detrimental, or neutral, neither harm nor benefit to one of the species or both. Assigning a plus sign for beneficial interaction, minus sign for detrimental, and 0 for neutral interaction. Let us look at all the possible outcomes of interspecific interactions. Both the species benefit in mutualism and both lose in competition in their interaction with each other. In both parasitism and predation, only one species benefit, parasites and predators respectively, and the interaction is detrimental to the other species, host and prey respectively. The interaction where one species is benefited and the other is neither benefited nor harmed is called commensalism. In commensalism, on the other hand, one species is harmed whereas the other is unaffected. Predation, parasitism, and commensalism share a common characteristic. The interacting species lie closely together. Predation. What would happen to all the energy fed by autotrophic organisms if the community has no animal to eat the plant? You can think of predation as nature's way of transferring to higher trophic level the energy fed by plant. When we think of predator and prey, most probably it is the tiger and the deer that readily come to our mind. But a sparrow eating any seed is no less a predator. Although animal-eating plants are categorized separately as herbivorous, they are, in a broad ecological context, not very different from predators. Besides acting as conduits for energy transfer across trophic level, predators play other important roles. They keep prey population under control. But for predators, prey species could achieve very high population density and cause ecosystem instability. When certain exotic species are introduced into a geographical area, they become invasive and start spreading fast because the invaded land does not have its natural predators. The prickly pear cactus, introduced into Australia in the early 1920s, caused havoc by spreading rapidly into millions of hectares of rangeland. Finally, the invasive cactus was brought under control only after a cactus feeding predators, a moth, from its natural habitats was introduced into the country. Biological control methods adopted in agricultural pest control are based on the ability of predators to regulate prey population. Predators also help in maintaining species diversity in a community by reducing the intensity of competition among competing prey species. In a rocky intertidal community of the American Pacific coast of the starfish Piscator is an important predator. In a field experiment, when all the starfish were removed from an enclosed intertidal area, more than 10 species of invertebrates became extinct within a year because of interspecific competition. If a predator is too efficient and overexploits its prey, then the prey might become extinct, and following it, the predator will also become extinct for lack of food. This is the reason why predators in nature are prudent. Prey species have evolved various defenses to lessen the impact of predation. Some species of insects and frogs are critically colored camouflage to avoid being detected easily by the predators. Some are poisonous and therefore avoided by the predators. The monarch butterfly is highly distasteful to its predator but because of a special chemical present in its body. Interestingly, the butterfly acquires this chemical during its caterpillar stage of feeding on a poisonous weeds. For plants, herbivorous or predators, nearly 25% of all insects are known to be phytophoresis, feeding on plant sap and other parts of plants. The problem is particularly severe for plants because, unlike animals, they cannot run away from their predators. Plants therefore have evolved an astonishing variety of morphological and chemical defense against herbivorous. Thorns, acacia, cactus are the most common morphological means of defense. Many plants produce and store chemicals that make the herbivorous sick when they are eaten, inhibit feeding or digestion, disrupt its reproduction, or even kill it. You must have seen the wheat catastrophe growing in an abundant field. The plant produces highly poisonous cardioglycosides, and that is why you never see any cattle or goat browsing on this plant. A wide variety of chemical substances that we extract from plant on a commercial scale, nicotine, caffeine, quinine, strychnine, opium, etc., are produced by them actually as defense against beggar and browser. To competition. When Darwin spoke of struggle for existence and survival of the fittest in nature, he was convinced that interspecific competition is a potent force in organic evolution. It is generally believed that competition occurs when closely related species compete for same resources that are limiting, but this is not entirely true. Firstly, total unrelated species could also compete for the same resource. For instance, in some shallow South American lakes, visiting flamingos and resident fishes compete for their common food, the zooplankton in the lake. Secondly, resources need not be limiting for competition to occur. In interference competition, the feeding efficiency of one species might be reduced due to the interfering and inevitable presence of the other species, even if resources, food and space are abundant. Therefore, competition is best defined as a process in which the fitness of one species, measured in terms of its R, the intrinsic rate of increase, is significantly lower in the presence of another species. It is relatively easy to demonstrate in laboratory experiments, as Gauss and other experimental ecologists did. When resources are limited, the competitively superior species will eventually eliminate the other species. But evidence for such competitive exclusion occurring in nature is not always conclusive. Strong and persuasive circumstantial evidence does not. It does exist. Circumstantial evidence does exist, however, in some cases. The abandoned tortoise in Galapagos Island became extinct within a decade after goats were introduced on the island, apparently due to greater browsing efficiency of the goat. Another evidence for the occurring of competition in nature comes from what is called competitive release. A species whose distribution is restricted to a small geographical area because of the presence of a competitively superior species, it found to expand its distributional range dramatically when the competing species is experimentally removed. Parnell's elegant field experiment showed that on the rocky sea coast of Scotland, the larger and competitively superior barnacle balanus dominates the intertidal area. The excludes the smaller barnacle cathamalus from that zone. In general, herbivorous and plants appear to be more adversely affected by competition than carnivorous. Gauss's competitive exclusion principle states that two closely related species competing for the same resource cannot coexist indefinitely, and the competitively inferior one will be eliminated eventually. This may be true if resources are limited, but not otherwise. More recent studies do not support such gross generalization about competition. While they do not rule out the occurrence of interspecific competition in nature, they point out that species facing competition might evolve mechanisms that promote coexistence rather than exclusion. One such mechanism is resource partitioning. If two species compete for the same resource, they could avoid competition by choosing, for instance, different times for feeding or different foraging patterns. MacArthur showed that 5 closely related species of warblers living on the same tree were able to avoid competition and coexist due to behavioral difference in their foraging activity. Parasitism. Considering that the parasitic mode of life ensures free lodging and meals, it is not surprising that parasitism has evolved in so many taxonomic groups from plant to higher vertebrates. Many parasites have evolved to be host specific. They can parasitize only a single species of host in such a way that both host and parasite tend to co-evolve. That is, if the host evolved special mechanism for rejecting or resisting the parasite has to evolve mechanism to counteract and neutralize them. In order to be successful with the same host species in accordance with their lifestyle, parasites evolve special adaptations such as loss of unnecessary sense organ, presence of adhesive organ or sucker to cling onto the host, loss of digestive system and high reproductive capacity. The life cycle of parasites are often complex, involving one or two intermediate hosts or vector to facilitate parasitism of its primary host. The human liver fluke, a termitode parasite, depends on two intermediate hosts, a snail and a fish, to complete its life cycle. The malaria parasite needs a vector mosquito to spread to other host. Majority of the parasites harm the host. They may reduce the survival, growth and reproduction of the host and reduce its population density. They might render the host more vulnerable to predation by making it physically weak. Do you believe that an ideal parasite should be able to thrive within the host without harming it? Then why didn't natural selection lead to the evolution of such totally harmless parasites? Parasites that feed on the external surface of the host organism are called ectoparasites. The most familiar example of this group are the lice on human and ticks on dog. Many marine fishes are infested with ectoparasitic copepods. Cascuta, a parasitic plant that is commonly found growing on hedge plant, has lost its chlorophyll and lived in the course of evolution. It derives its nutrition from the host plant, which is parasitosis. The female mosquito is not considered a parasite, although it needs our blood for reproduction. Can you explain why? In contrast, endoparasites are those live inside the host body at different sizes, liver, kidney, lungs, red blood cell, etc. The life cycle of endoparasites are more complex because of their extreme specialization. Their morphological and anatomical features are greatly simplified while emphasizing their reproductive potential. Brood parasitism in bird is a fascinating example of parasitism in which the parasitic bird lays its egg in the nest of its host and lets the host incubate them. During the course of evolution, the eggs of the parasitic bird have evolved to resemble the host's egg in size and color to reduce the chance of the host bird detecting the foreign egg and ejecting them from the nest. Try to follow the movement of the cuckoo, quail and the crow in your neighborhood park during the breeding season, spring to summer, and watch brood parasitism in action. For commensalism, this is the interaction in which one species benefit and other is neither harmed nor benefited. An orchid growing as an epiphyte on a mango branch and barnacle growing on the back of a whale benefit while neither the mango tree nor the whale derives any apparent benefit. The cattle egret and grazing cattle in the close association, a sight you are most likely to catch if you live in farmed rural areas, is a classic example of commensalism. The egrets always forage close to where the cattle are grazing because the cattle, as they move, stir up the flush out insect from the vegetation that otherwise might be difficult for the egrets to find and catch. Another example of commensalism is the interaction between sea anemone that has stinging tentacle and the clown fish that lives among them. The fish get protection from predators which stay away from the stinging tentacle. The anemone does not appear to derive any benefits by hosting the clownfish. 5. Mutualism. This interaction confers benefits on both the interacting species. lichens represent an intimate mutualistic relationship between a fungi and photosynthesizing algae or cyanobacteria. Similarly, the mycorrhizae are association between fungi and the roots of higher plants. The fungi help the plant in absorption of essential nutrients from the soil, while the plant in turn provides the fungi with energy-yielding carbohydrate. The most spectacular and eventually fascinating example of mutualism are found in plant-animal relationship. Plants need the help of animals for pollinating their flowers and dispersing their seeds. Animals obviously have to be paid fees for the service that plants expect from them. Plants offer rewards or fees in the form of pollen and nectar for pollination and juicy and nutritious fruits for seed disappear. But the mutually beneficial system should also be safeguarded against cheater. For example, animals that try to steal nectar without aiding the pollination. Now you can see why plant-animal interaction often involves co-evolution of the mutualist. That is, the evolution of the flower and its pollinator species are tightly linked with one another. In many species of fig trees, there is a tight one-to-one relationship with the pollinator species of wasps. It means that a given fig species can be pollinated only by its partner wasp species and no other species. The female wasps use the fruit not only as an oviposition egg-laying site but use the developing seed within the fruit for nourishing its larva. The wasp pollinates the fig inflorescences while searching for suitable egg-laying site. In return for the favor of pollination, the fig offers the wasp some of its developing seeds as food for the developing wasp larva. Orchids show a bewildering diversity of floral patterns, many of which have evolved to attract the right pollinator, insect, bees, and bumblebees, and ensure guaranteed pollination by it. Not all orchids offer rewards. The Mediterranean orchid Orpheus employs sexual desire to get pollination done by a species of bee. One petal of its flower bears an uncanny resemblance to the female of the bee in size, color, and marking. The male bee is attracted to what it perceived as female. Pseudo copulates with the flower, and during the process it is dusted with pollinated from the flower. When the same bee pseudocopulates with another flower, it transfers pollen to its leaf and thus pollinate the flower. Here you can see how co-evolution operates. If the female bee's color pattern changes even slightly for any reason during evolution, pollination success will be reduced unless the orchid flower co-evolve to maintain the resemblance of its petal to the female bee.